We've had a long night with our children and grandbabies that we have left.
That is the church pastor Frank Pomeroy, who was out of town yesterday. He and his wife lost their 14-year-old daughter, Annabelle Pomeroy, remembered today by her mother, Sherry.
Now most of our church family is gone. As senseless as this tragedy was, our sweet Belle would not have been able to deal with losing so much family yesterday.
The youngest of the dead, just 18 months old. The eldest, 77. One family lost 8 members. Brian Holcomb was the fill-in pastor. He and his wife, Carla, their son, and his infant daughter died. So did their daughter-in-law, Crystal, 8 months pregnant, as well as 3 of her 5 children. They were all shot by 26-year-old Devin Patrick Kelly. He entered the church with an assault rifle and had at least 2 handguns. When he ran back out, he was shot by a neighbor before he drove off. Today, we heard more from the man who helped chase him down.
The shooter and a neighbor were both coming out, and both had weapons drawn and immediately started exchanging fire. The shooter got in his vehicle and took off. The other gentleman, who is a member of this community, came, jumped in my truck, and said, he just shot up the church. We got to go get him. And I said, okay, let's go.
Eventually, Kelly lost control of his vehicle. When police arrived, he was dead.
But the autopsy was conducted this morning, and what I can tell you is he sustained 3 gunshot wounds. 2 gunshot wounds were from the armed citizen, and he had a 3rd gunshot wound, which the medical examiner described as being consistent with being self-inflicted.
We're beginning to learn more about Devin Kelly's background. He received a bad conduct discharge from the Air Force for assaulting his wife and stepson, but that didn't prevent him from getting guns. In fact, he bought at least 4 over the past 4 years. As to motive, a hint today from officials.
This was not racially motivated. It wasn't over religious beliefs. There was a domestic situation going on within the family and the in-laws.
And a troubling admission tonight from the U.S. Air Force. Officials say they failed to alert federal authorities about those convictions. Kelly's name in a database should have prevented him from buying guns and perhaps saved lives in Sutherland Springs. Paul Hunter spent the day talking to people in that community, asking them about what they've lost.
Far from the crowds of reporters and police now swarming the hamlet of Sutherland Springs, Doug John plants 26 homemade metal crosses into the ground. A sickeningly familiar tribute in a country where mass killings have become almost routine. But with this one, in tiny Sutherland Springs, home to just a few hundred people, the anguish almost defies description. When shots were heard down the street yesterday, Ramiro Vidal raced toward the church. His mother was inside.
The first thing I saw a body right there in front of the door.
Then what did you think?
And I said, well, I said, only one person. And then I was asking for my mom, and this lady told me, no, your mom's all right. She's one of the lucky ones. She left in the hospital. And then I said, how about the rest of them? She said, don't even try to go in there. They're all they're just all dead.
3 clips there. Next door, the FBI hears Vidal's cousin explain he'd carried a dying child out from the church. Parents, he tells us, in hysterics.
Well, one parent was to try to hold him down, and, you know, and I mean, what can you tell him? Tell him it's going to be okay, and there's nothing you can do.
We heard stories like that at every single turn. Here lived Crystal Holcomb, 8 months pregnant. She, 3 of her kids, and 4 of her in-laws, all shot dead. Surrogate grandparents next door, Lupe and Emmanuel Gonzalez.
I don't know, I'm in a state of shock right now. I just miss them. Emily, she was the first one, and I loved her. Sorry, but I gotta go sit inside.
And next door to them, Mary Dykeman, whose son's girlfriend was shot.
It's a small town and everybody loves everybody. I don't know why somebody would pick a little small town like this to come and destroy the town. It's hard. It's very hard.
I mean, we can see all the stuff going on around the world, and we, like those people over there that happen someplace else, like in Vegas and whatever, they got to cope with it. Now it's our turn to cope with it, and just take it one day at a time forward. That's all I got to say for now.
It's as if everyone here is family, and all of them are scarred. As if the town itself is broken, maybe never to be repaired.
And Sutherland Springs is where Paul is tonight. Paul, as you spoke to people in the community, did anyone raise the issue of guns?
Not a single person, Ian. And I say this with the greatest respect to everybody we met, because they got a lot on their minds right now. This is a particularly horrific time for everyone, but not even a whisper that maybe guns are a part of the problem here, or that maybe toughening gun laws might be a part of the solution. There was none of that. Like, this is Texas, right? 100% guns are a part of the culture here, but it's almost as if there's an acceptance that, you know, one day it'll happen to you. One day it'll be your city or your town or your neighborhood or your hamlet. And that's just the way it is.
Now, you were in Newtown, Connecticut after the shooting that killed 20 children. If ever there was going to be a shooting that would change attitudes and policy in the United States, I suppose it would have been that one, but things didn't change.
You know, Newtown to me was colossally baffling. It was so sad, right? It was beyond the pale horrific. These were children, right? I cried at Newtown. I can still get choked up thinking about it. It was that bad. And you thought after Newtown that finally there was the impetus. This was the time. It was the tipping point, right? There was broad public impetus for change on this. We saw that with Barack Obama, right? We saw his tears. We saw the legislative proposals he put forward to toughen gun laws, and we saw what happened to them. They failed, right? I was in Newtown for the massacre. I was in Washington when Obama's proposals failed. It was like you could feel the air going out of the balloon. You live in this country long enough, Ian, right? You live through the Orlandos and the Las Vegases and the San Bernardinos. You live through things like this and all the smaller mass shootings that don't make the headlines, and there are way more of those, right? You live through all of that, and it's hard not to be a cynic. It's hard to believe that on this issue, anything is ever going to change in this country.
Well, no talk about gun control there tonight, as you point out, but certainly lots of grief. Thanks, Paul. In the charged partisan atmosphere, mass killings in the United States usually do get political very quickly. Last week, after an immigrant from Uzbekistan who admired ISIS allegedly ran over and killed 8 people, the U.S. president said the course of action was clear: restrict immigration.
We have to get much tougher, we have to get much smarter, and we have to get much less politically correct.
But in the wake of yesterday's violence, Trump offered no policy response.
Mental health is your problem here. This was a very, based on preliminary reports, very deranged individual, but this isn't a guns situation.
So, according to the president, not a gun situation. Let's bring in Keith Bogue, who's in our Washington bureau. And Keith, let's talk about the reaction in the United States to mass killings like the one we just saw.
Well, you know, you get a lot of attention to things like gun control when these things happen, as they so often do happen in this country. But what gets less attention is the way in which the culture appears to have been changing over the last, say, couple of decades. There's a new kind of culture of a citizen protector identity growing up among people here, where you see not just an increase in the sense of defensiveness and buying handguns and so on, although all of that is true, but you also have this incredible increase in the number of people who have concealed carry permits. That includes the President of the United States, by the way. 14.5 million Americans now have concealed carry permits that allow them to carry their own handguns. And it's all growing out of this sense of defensiveness, but also the sense that being able to protect yourself and your family and your community is a sign of status in the community.
And so it turns out in Texas, we saw that neighbor and the guy who drove him, they did exactly that. The neighbor was armed and he intervened.
Yeah, and that's going to get the attention of a lot of people who already have those sympathies, whether they get the same media attention or not. And the other thing, of course, is that for the gun manufacturers and for the NRA, they know what this event means. They know that nothing boosts gun sales like three different things. One, the threat that politicians will take away people's guns or at least make it harder for them to get. Two, terrorist attacks. And three, exactly the kind of thing that we saw in Texas yesterday. So while there will be some kind of debate in the media and so on about gun control, in fact, for all intents and purposes, all practical purposes, that is, the debate over gun control here is essentially over, and the NRA won.
All right, Keith, thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
And now, Adrian, let's pick up on one of the points Keith made, and that is the somewhat counterintuitive connection sometimes between presidents and gun sales.
Right. So let's look at this president, a gun-friendly Donald Trump, the first president since Ronald Reagan to address the NRA. Oddly enough, he's actually been very bad for the gun business. So if we break it down a bit, let's have a look at a company called Sturm Ruger. That is the company that manufactured the assault rifle used in the Texas church shooting. Its profits last quarter were cut in half. Gun sales were down more than 35% year over year. And yet, when Barack Obama was president and it looked like Hillary Clinton might become the next president, gun sales soared. So when people thought they were going to lose their weapons, they started buying up. Now that Donald Trump seems set to protect gun ownership, buying eases off a bit. And this is a bit interesting. Shares in Sturm Ruger rose a bit in the days after two of the biggest mass shootings recently, Las Vegas and Orlando. Why? Maybe this is just more confirmation that Americans seem to believe the only way to protect themselves from guns is with guns.